Hey guys, tonight we're diving deep into the hidden corners of Japanese history, specifically the world of courtesans, or oiran, and the incredibly difficult realities they faced, especially concerning something as fundamentally human as pregnancy. It's a place where the vibrant kimonos and elaborate hairstyles are not symbols of freedom, but rather markers of a life meticulously choreographed and rarely chosen. On one hand, it was a hub of culture, fashion, and entertainment, driving trends that permeated all levels of society. The Iran were not merely prostitutes, they were highly skilled entertainers, trained in music, dance, poetry, and conversation. They were in many ways the celebrities of their time, their names and faces gracing woodblock prints and whispered in tea houses. You might even feel a flicker of admiration for their artistry as you observe their graceful movements and witty repartee. Yet, on the other hand, it was a tightly regulated district, a gilded cage. You quickly learn that entering this world was almost always a last resort, a consequence of poverty, debt, or familial hardship. Young girls, often from impoverished rural families, were sold into indenture to brothels, sometimes as young as 7 or 8 years old. This wasn't a career choice. It was a fate. Historians still argue whether the perceived glamour truly softened the edges of this harsh reality for those within it. You can almost hear the faint clinking of coins, a constant reminder of the transactions that defined every aspect of life here. Your own freedom, you realize with a chill, would be entirely forfeit in such a place. Your destiny dictated by contracts and the whims of strangers. Your perception of beauty, you quickly realize, is being reshaped by the strict, almost suffocating aesthetic of the era. Every gesture, every glance, every carefully applied layer of white makeup serves a purpose: to attract, to entertain, to fulfill the illusions demanded by the clientele. But beneath that porcelain facade, you sense the tremors of a life lived on the edge, constantly balancing on a precarious tightrope of expectation and exploitation. Imagine, for a moment, stepping back in time, not to a serene tea garden or a bustling Edo marketplace, but to the hushed, gilded corridors of a Yoshiwara pleasure house. You feel the faint scent of incense and expensive perfumes, mingling with something else as subtle, underlying current of desperation. You hear the distant twang of a shamisen, the soft murmur of polite conversation, but beneath it all, there's a palpable tension, unspoken dread. This isn't the romanticized vision you might have seen in movies. This is the raw, unvarnished truth, where beauty was a cage and survival an art. Trust me, you probably won't survive 5 minutes in this world without a serious reality check. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're re-listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing at the entrance to this floating world, a realm designed for pleasure, but built on an intricate system of debt and control. This world, the Yukio, or floating world, was a fascinating paradox. As you step deeper into this world, the illusions begin to crumble, replaced by the stark reality of early training. Your imagined childhood, filled with games and innocent curiosities, is brutally snatched away. For the young girls, often called Komoro or Shinzo, depending on their age and stage, life transformed into an unyielding regimen of education and discipline. You observe them, tiny figures in oversized kimonos, their faces serious beyond their years, as they are relentlessly drilled in the myriad arts required of a high-ranking courtesan, all while wearing kimonos that could weigh upwards of 20 pounds with elaborate sashes that cinched them so tightly it was sometimes hard to breathe. You might observe a younger girl struggling with the weight of her practice kimono, her small shoulders slumping only to straighten immediately under the stern gaze of her instructor. They learned the intricate, often painful, process of styling their hair into towering, elaborate arrangements that could take hours and involved heavy ornaments. This wasn't about comfort. It was about presenting an unattainable ideal, a living work of art. The message was clear. Your body is not your own. It is a canvas, an instrument, a commodity. You might even feel a pang of sympathy for these young souls, stripped of their innocence long before their time. It's a chilling thought, that such delicate beauty was forged through such harshness. The discipline was relentless, designed to erase any trace of their former lives and mold them into the perfect embodiment of the floating world's allure. It's less a school and more a specialized academy for human adornment and entertainment, where every lesson is a brick laid in the foundation of their future servitude. You watch as they are taught the intricate movements of traditional dance, their small feet learning to glide and pivot with a grace that seems almost unnatural for a child. The shamisen, a three-stringed instrument, becomes an extension of their bodies, its melodies both beautiful and melancholic. You'd witness them enduring hours of practice to maintain the perfect posture, the delicate hand gestures, and the captivating smile. Their diet was often controlled, their sleep curtailed. Every waking hour was dedicated to refining their skills, ensuring they would one day command the highest prices. The concept of playtime or leisure simply doesn't exist in their vocabulary. Imagine the exhaustion, the mental fortitude required to absorb so much, so fast, all while knowing your future depends entirely on mastering these skills. One might think it's akin to a strict ballet academy, but the stakes here are infinitely higher, intertwined with lifelong debt. Historians still argue whether the comprehensive nature of this education was a form of subtle empowerment or merely a more sophisticated means of control. You might notice the slight tremor in a child's hand as she tries to perfect a brushstroke, a tiny window into the immense pressure she carries. You hear the ceaseless plucking of strings, sometimes discordant, sometimes sweet, echoing through the paper-thin walls. Then there's the art of conversation, a subtle, intellectual game where wit and charm are weapons. They learn about poetry, calligraphy, the tea ceremony, and even the nuances of current events, all designed to make them captivating companions, not just pretty faces. It's a curriculum that would make a modern university student weep, compressed into childhood years. You might even catch a glimpse of a stern elder Oyen, or the brothel, mistress, a fearsome figure known as the Okasan, observing with an eagle, ready to correct the slightest misstep with a sharp word, or sometimes something more. The training wasn't just intellectual or artistic, it was intensely physical. And then there's the matter of their bodies. We're taught how to sit, how to walk, how to pour sake with exquisite grace. Having glimpsed the brutal training, you now begin to understand the rigid framework that governs the floating world, the hierarchy's grip. Your place within this complex social structure, you quickly learn, isn't merely about talent or beauty. It's a meticulously defined ladder, each rung dictating your daily life, your income, and even your slim chances of eventual freedom. From the lowest Camro to the exalted Oiran, every individual has a prescribed role, and deviating from it is simply not an option. They might have a small retinue of attendants and a more select clientele. An Oyan would have her own private rooms, beautifully furnished, and a dedicated staff. Her meals would be prepared separately, her kimonos more exquisite, her accessories more precious. A lower-ranking courtesan, by contrast, might share a room with several others and have far fewer personal comforts. UD also observed the subtle etiquette and deference shown by those of lower rank to those above them, constant reinforcement of the pecking order. This intricate system created a perverse form of ambition, where girls would strive for years, pouring all their energy into mastering their craft, hoping to climb just a few rungs up the ladder, believing it would bring them closer to respect, comfort, or perhaps even freedom. It's a sobering thought. Their entire identity was defined by where they stood in this brutal pecking order. A system that exploited their youth and talents for profit, all while maintaining an illusion of glamour and aspiration. It makes you wonder how much human dignity can be bought and sold. But the true pinnacle, the dream of every young girl forced into this life, is to become an Orin, or, in later periods, a Tu. These were the supernovas of the floating world, the highest-ranking courtesans, revered for their exceptional beauty, wit, and artistic accomplishments. You'd witness their elaborate processions through the streets of Yoshiwara, dazzling display of silk, gold, and gravity-defying hairstyles, attended by numerous Camaro and Shinzo. To be an Orien meant commanding exorbitant fees, selecting one's clients, and living in relative luxury within the confines of the brothel. It was, in essence, being a superstar, albeit one in a gilded cage. Historians still argue whether the extreme scarcity of Oiran positions, made the dream of achieving it a cruelly effective means of maintaining order and aspiration among the lower ranks. This isn't just about status, it's about control. Finely tuned system designed to maximize profit for the brothel owners while keeping the courtesans firmly in their place. At the very bottom are the camro, the child attendants you saw earlier. Still in their apprenticeships, performing menial tasks and observing their elders. Above them are the shinzo young women who have begun their formal training but are not yet fully fledged courtesans. They might assist the higher-ranking women, learning the ropes, running errands, and sometimes even accompanying them to social engagements. You'd notice they're eager, yet still somewhat innocent. Expressions as they try to absorb every detail of the elaborate rituals around them. Then come the hashijor, the lowest rank of courtesans. Still accessible to a wider range of clients, but lacking the prestige and specialized skills of those above them. Their lives, you sense, are far more monotonous and physically taxing, with less opportunity for refinement or intellectual engagement. Ascending the ladder, you encounter the koshijor, a mid-tier courtesan, who is beginning to gain a reputation. Your interaction with this world would quickly reveal that these ranks weren't just titles. They manifested in every aspect of daily life. Having understood the rigid social strata, you now confront the immense pressure to conform to the era's demanding aesthetic. Navigating the world of beauty standards, painful rituals. You might imagine a leisurely beauty routine, perhaps a relaxing bath, and a gentle application of lotions. But in the floating world, beauty was a rigorous, often agonizing discipline, bordering on self-torture, all in pursuit of an idealized, almost otherworldly perfection that catered to the male gaze. The first thing that strikes you is the skin. The ideal was a ghostly white complexion, achieved through thick layers of shiranuri, a white lead-based makeup. While not exclusively limited to courtesans, it was a prominent feature in the floating world. You'd observe the dark, almost lacquered sheen of their teeth when they smiled, a striking contrast to their white faces. This was achieved by applying a solution of iron filings dissolved in tea or sake, often mixed with gallnuts, which stained the teeth a permanent, deep black. The reasoning behind it was multifaceted. It highlighted the whiteness of their skin, was considered a sign of beauty and maturity, and possibly even served a hygienic purpose by preventing decay. However, the process itself was unpleasant, staining the mouth and requiring regular reapplication. You might involuntarily touch your own teeth, feeling grateful for modern dentistry and its emphasis on pearly whites rather than obsidian ones. It's a chilling reminder that beauty in this world often came at an extraordinary physical cost. Each ritual, a testament to the lengths one must go to embody an ideal that was ultimately not for oneself. You'd observe the meticulous, almost ceremonial, application of this heavy paste, covering every inch of exposed skin on the face, neck, and chest. It wasn't just about looking pale. It was about transforming the skin into a luminous, unblemished canvas, suggesting purity and refinement. You might feel a faint itching sensation just imagining the weight and texture of it, especially in the humid Japanese summers. Beneath this white mask, a faint blush was sometimes applied around the eyes, and on the lips, often using safflower extract, creating a stark contrast that emphasized the eyes and mouth. This intense whiteness, while visually striking, was also incredibly drying and damaging to the skin over time. Then there's the hair. Well, the hair. The towering, intricate hairstyles, known as nihongami, were architectural marvels that often required specialized frames and padding to achieve their gravity-defying volume. You'd witness the agonizing process of styling, which involved copious amounts of camellia oil, wax, and numerous pins. These elaborate coiffures weren't just for a night. They were designed to last for days, sometimes even a week, before being painstakingly dismantled and restyled. Imagine trying to sleep with such a structure on your head, or the sheer discomfort of constantly having your scalp pulled taut. To preserve these masterpieces, courtesans often slept on small, raised wooden blocks called takamakura, rather than soft pillows. To avoid disturbing their intricate arrangements, you can almost feel the crick in your neck just thinking about it. Historians still argue whether the extreme discomfort of these hairstyles was a subtle form of control, ensuring courtesans were constantly aware of their constrained existence. Perhaps the most startling, and certainly the most painful, beauty ritual you'd encounter is ohagro, the practice of blackening teeth. With the elaborate beauty rituals now etched into your understanding, you follow a courtesan through her day, witnessing firsthand the relentless, almost exhausting, pace of her daily routine. Ceaseless performance. This isn't a life of leisure, even for the highest ranks. It's a meticulously structured existence where every hour, from dawn to deep into the night, is dedicated to maintaining an illusion, perfecting a skill, or catering to a client. The elaborate hairstyles which you now know take hours to construct and often remain for days, carefully checked and touched up. Mornings might be dedicated to lessons, mastering a new shamisen tune, practicing calligraphy, or refining dance movements. You'd watch as she pours sake with a delicate hand, her witty banter flowing as easily as the liquid. Every word, every gesture, is calculated to enchant, to maintain the illusion of an ideal companion. She's expected to be well-versed in current affairs, literature, and gossip, capable of holding court on a variety of topics, all while never truly revealing her true self. The laughter you hear might be genuine, but the smiles often contain a hint of weariness. Even after clients have departed, her duties might not be over. There are brothel accounts to review, junior courtesans to mentor, or preparations for the next day's engagements. Your eyes might begin to feel heavy just watching her ceaseless activity. It's a life lived under constant scrutiny, a beautiful, exhausting blur of performance and obligation, leaving precious little room for anything else. You'd observe her focused concentration, her body moving with a trained grace, even when alone. These aren't just hobbies, they're essential tools of her trade, honed to captivate and charm. Midday would often involve attending to the brothel's affairs or receiving visitors. Perhaps a potential new client would be introduced, or an artist commissioned to create her portrait for a woodblock print, a crucial form of advertising in that era. You'd see her switch effortlessly between roles: a diligent student, a gracious hostess, a captivating muse. It's a continuous act, demanding immense mental and emotional energy, akin to a stage actor who never leaves the spotlight. Historians still argue whether the extreme formality of these routines provided a strange sense of structure and safety within an otherwise precarious existence. The thick application of white makeup, the delicate blush, and the blackened teeth must be refreshed. This isn't a quick dab here and there. It's a full reapplication, ensuring a flawless facade for the coming hours. You might hear the quiet rustle of silk as she dresses, choosing from a vast array of exquisitely crafted kimonos, each one a statement of her status and the mood she wishes to project. The layering alone is an art form, each garment adding to the visual splendor and the physical weight. There's no downtime, no true personal space, and certainly no opportunity for spontaneity. Your day where you in her shoes would begin surprisingly early, long before the sun had fully risen. Once prepared, the performance truly begins. As evening approaches, the real work begins. The tea ceremonies, the elegant dinners, the engaging conversations with clients. Each interaction is a carefully orchestrated event, with the relentless daily performance now a clear picture. You move into the heart of the courtesan's interaction: customer relations, delicate dance. This wasn't merely about physical intimacy. It was a sophisticated game of allure, intellect, and emotional manipulation, where every gesture, every word, was carefully calibrated. This wasn't a universal privilege, of course, but for the elite, the process was elaborate. The potential patron had to gain an introduction, prove his wealth, and often visit multiple times before even being permitted to speak directly to her. For the top oiron, it was a carefully managed aspect of the relationship. It's meant to deepen the client's attachment and, naturally, his financial commitment. You'd notice how the courtesan always maintained a certain mystique, never fully revealing her true self. She was a mirror reflecting the client's desires, a canvas onto which he could project his fantasies. It's this delicate balance, being desirable yet unattainable, intimate yet distant, was crucial. It kept clients returning, perpetually chasing the elusive dream of truly possessing her attention or affection. You might even feel a slight sense of unease as you watch these interactions, recognizing the artifice inherent in every polite smile and every engaging laugh. It's a world where true connection is a dangerous luxury, and the most valuable commodity is the illusion of it. These initial visits, known as yobadashi and yukaga, were opportunities for the courtesan to observe, assess, and, if she wished, eventually accept him. You might witness a wealthy merchant fidgeting nervously, hoping to catch her eye, while she maintains an air of aloof grace. A master of subtle power dynamics. It's like a high-stakes audition where the client is performing for the performer. You're not just observing transactions. You're witnessing the intricate weaving of temporary fantasies, all while maintaining a crucial, unspoken distance. You'd quickly discover that a high-ranking Oyon didn't simply entertain clients. She chose them. Once accepted, the interactions were steeped in ritual. You'd observe elaborate banquets, where she would preside not as a servant, but as the gracious host. Her role was to charm, to engage in witty banter, to recite poetry, to play the shamisen, and to ensure her client felt like the most fascinating person in the room. This required an encyclopedic knowledge of social etiquette, a keen sense of humor, and the ability to listen intently, making each man feel singularly special. You might see her gently guide a conversation away from an uncomfortable topic, or subtly flatter a client's ego, all while maintaining an air of detached professionalism. It's a psychological tightrope walk, constantly gauging the mood, anticipating desires, and providing an escape from the mundane. Historians still argue whether this profound emotional labor was more draining than the physical aspects of their work. Physical intimacy, when it occurred, was often the culmination of this elaborate courtship, not the starting point. With the intricate dance of customer relations now understood, you pivot to the unspoken anchor of the courtesan's existence: financial burdens, unending debt, beneath the shimmering silks and the captivating performances. Sense the gnawing reality of an insurmountable ledger, a constant, crushing weight that binds her to the brothel more securely than any physical chain. This money, however, wasn't a payment for the girl. It was an advance against her future earnings. A significant portion went directly to the brothel owner to repay the initial debt, covering her living expenses, training costs, and the upkeep of the establishment. A courtesan could buy her way out of debt, or a wealthy patron could pay off her remaining balance. But you'd quickly understand just how rare this truly was. The debt was often inflated by the brothel owners, making it virtually impossible for a courtesan to earn enough to cover it, even after decades of work. Imagine working tirelessly year after year, only to see your freedom fund shrink while your total obligation quietly swells. It's a bit like trying to empty a swimming pool with a teacup, while someone else keeps refilling it with a fire hose. The subtle clinking of coin purses you might hear in the distance takes on a sinister overtone, presenting not prosperity, but perpetual bondage. This unending financial burden was the invisible, yet ever-present master of their lives, shaping every decision and extinguishing most hopes of a life beyond the pleasure quarters. The more luxurious her lifestyle appeared, the more exquisite her kimonos, more elaborate her hair ornaments, the larger her retinue of attendants, the more her debt increased. It was a vicious cycle. The more successful she became, the more she was invested in, and thus the deeper she fell into financial servitude. You might observe a courtesan's quiet sigh as a particularly lavish gift arrives from a client, knowing it likely adds to her unpayable balance rather than reducing it. Historians still argue whether the astronomical prices for an Oiran's services were primarily for prestige or a calculated move to ensure permanent indebtedness. She immediately inherited this sum as her debt, a financial obligation that grew larger with every kimono, every meal, every lesson, and every ornament provided by the brothel owner. It's a system designed to be self-perpetuating, a financial quicksand from which escape was rare. You might hear the faint scratching of a brush, imagining the meticulous record-keeping of these ever-growing ledgers. This isn't just about earning a living. It's about paying off a debt that often spiraled beyond reach. You learn that when a girl was sold into the pleasure quarters, her parents or guardians received a sum of money, often substantial enough to alleviate their own poverty. You'd realize that despite the high fees courtesans commanded, very little of that money actually reached their pockets. The idea of freedom, or missiege, was theoretically possible. With the crushing weight of endless debt now a constant backdrop, you become acutely aware of another pervasive danger in the courtesan. Slife health struggles, constant threat. The glittering facade of the pleasure quarters often concealed a harsh reality of pervasive illness. Both common ailments that plagued society and those specifically amplified by their demanding profession. While courtesans were expected to be clean and presentable, the sheer number of people living in close quarters within the brothels, combined with the lack of advanced sanitation, made them breeding grounds for common diseases. You might hear the persistent cough of a younger attendant, or see the telltale pallor of someone battling a fever. The heavy, lead-based makeup could cause skin irritations and lead poisoning over time. The tight kimonos and elaborate hairstyles caused discomfort, restricted movement, and led to physical strain. You might observe a courtesan surreptitiously rubbing her temples, a faint grimace on her face from a persistent headache induced by a heavy wig. The lack of proper rest, irregular eating habits, and the emotional stress of their lives further weakened their immune systems, making them more susceptible to any passing illness. It's a somber thought. The very elements that made them beautiful and desirable also contributed to their physical decline, slowly but surely eroding their health, often leading to shortened lives lived in quiet suffering. Things like tuberculosis, dysentery, and cholera, which were rampant throughout Edo period Japan, would sweep through the pleasure districts with devastating efficiency. Imagine the dread that would settle in with every new season, every rumored outbreak, knowing there was little effective recourse beyond traditional remedies. Your senses might pick up a faint, acrid smell of medicinal herbs mingled with the sweet incense, a subtle warning of the vulnerabilities that lay beneath the surface. The constant exposure to clients, often without any protective measures we take for granted today, meant a high prevalence of sexually transmitted infections. Syphilis in particular was a widespread and devastating disease. You might notice the subtle skin lesions, the telltale sores, or the slowest decline in some of the older women, tragically recognizing the signs of advanced syphilis. It was a silent epidemic, often untreatable, leading to disfigurement, dementia, and a slow, agonizing death. Historians still argue whether the perceived acceptance of such diseases was due to societal ignorance or a grim resignation to an unavoidable aspect of the trade. You'd quickly observe that basic hygiene, by modern standards, was rudimentary at best. Beyond these general threats, courtesans faced specific occupational hazards that severely impacted their health. Furthermore, the rigorous beauty standards and the relentless work schedule took a severe toll on their physical well-being. As you delve deeper into the courtesans' vulnerabilities, you confront the specter that loomed largest and most terrifyingly over their existence: pregnancy, the ultimate taboo, in a world meticulously designed around illusion and commodification. The undeniable reality of a growing belly was a catastrophic disruption, direct threat to their livelihood, their value, and often their very lives. A courtesan's body was a commercial asset, meticulously groomed and presented, and a pregnancy rendered her unmarketable. Her physical form would change, making the elaborate kimonos ill-fitting and her graceful movements difficult. A child born in the Yoshiwara was often considered a source of shame, a visible mark of their degraded status. With no legitimate claim to a father's name or a place in respectable society, while some clients might have had fleeting affections, very few were willing to acknowledge a child born of such circumstances, as it would bring disgrace upon their own families. This meant that the courtesan was utterly alone in facing this crisis, with no one to turn to for genuine support or protection. You can almost feel the cold isolation that would surround a woman grappling with such a secret, knowing that discovery meant not just ruin, but potentially abandonment or worse. The concept of choice, or even compassionate care, simply did not exist within the brutal confines of this world. The very essence of her profession was tied to providing a specific kind of entertainment and companionship, one that did not include the realities of motherhood. Imagine the sheer panic that would grip a courtesan upon suspecting she was pregnant, knowing the severe repercussions that awaited her. It was a secret that had to be kept at all costs, a ticking time bomb hidden beneath layers of silk. You feel a chilling sense of dread knowing that this natural biological process was, for them, a potential death sentence. Not only did they lose the income from a productive courtesan, but they also incurred the potential costs of her care, childbirth, and a child's upkeep, none of which yielded any profit. Their pragmatic approach to this problem was ruthless. The goal was always to terminate the pregnancy as quickly and discreetly as possible, or, failing that, to ensure the child disappeared without a trace. You might feel a profound sense of helplessness as you realize the utter lack of agency these women had over their own bodies. Their reproductive rights completely erased by economic necessity. Historians still argue whether the extreme measures taken were purely economic or also stemmed from a societal desire to maintain the purity of the pleasure quarters illusion. You quickly understand that pregnancy was strictly forbidden in the pleasure quarters. The brothel owners viewed pregnancy as a significant financial loss. The stigma surrounding pregnancy for a courtesan was immense. With the crushing taboo of pregnancy now understood, you move into the desperate realm of traditional methods. Grim folklore. When a courtesan found herself pregnant, legitimate medical help was virtually non-existent, leaving her to rely on whispered remedies. Imagine the frantic attempts to induce a miscarriage through vigorous activity, jumping repeatedly from high places or subjecting oneself to intense jarring motions. While such actions might, in rare cases, trigger a premature birth, they were far more likely to cause severe injury, internal bleeding, or even death to the woman. With no guarantee of terminating the pregnancy, perhaps a particular bitter herb, or an extremely spicy dish, consumed in large quantities, with the hope that it would somehow cleanse the womb. While some natural substances do have abortifacient properties, the knowledge of dosage and safe application was entirely absent. Instead, these desperate attempts often led to violent vomiting, severe digestive distress, and profound weakness, adding to the woman's suffering without providing the desired, albeit tragic, result. The air around you seems to grow heavy with the unspoken weight of these countless harrowing attempts, each one a silent scream of a woman trapped by circumstance and without recourse. It's a testament to their desperation that such life-threatening methods were even considered. You might feel a chill at the thought of a young woman, alone in her room, flinging herself from a small chest of drawers, praying for a grim outcome, and dangerous practices passed down through generations, often steeped in superstition rather than science. Stories, often hushed and shared in low whispers, spoke of things like taking scalding hot baths for extended periods or applying searing hot compresses to the abdomen. The idea, of course, was to shock the body into expelling the fetus. You'd wince at the imagined pain, the risk of severe burns, and the undeniable fact that such methods were more likely to harm the woman than to achieve their intended tragic purpose. Some accounts even hint at the use of forceful abdominal massage or external pressure by untrained individuals, leading to internal injuries and hemorrhages. This wasn't just dangerous, it was an act of profound self-violence, born of absolute necessity. Historians still argue whether the prevalence of these dangerous folk remedies was a reflection of widespread ignorance or a deliberate societal neglect of women's reproductive health. You sense the profound fear and isolation that would drive a woman to consider such perilous options. You'd quickly learn about the array of desperate measures, often involving extreme physical exertion. Then there were the folk remedies involving extreme temperatures or physical trauma. You might also hear vague allusions to certain foods or concoctions believed to induce miscarriage, though these were often more myth than medicine. Stepping further into the shadows of desperation, you encounter the perilous world of herbal abortifacients, whispered secrets. When physical methods failed or seemed too overtly brutal, courtesans and those around them often turned to the clandestine knowledge of plants, relying on the belief that certain botanical concoctions could end an unwanted pregnancy. Among the most frequently mentioned was safflower, often used to create the delicate blush on their faces. Ironically, in larger, concentrated doses, especially from the seeds, it was thought to induce contractions or even cause uterine bleeding. These might include roots or leaves known to be potent purgatives or emetics, the hope that violent expulsion from the body would also lead to the termination of the pregnancy. You can almost taste the acrid bitterness of such brews, feel the burning in the throat, and the subsequent violent sickness. The danger was immense. Internal bleeding, severe dehydration, organ damage, and even death were very real possibilities. The decision to resort to such dangerous concoctions underscored the profound desperation and the absolute lack of safe, legal, or even knowledgeable alternatives for women in their position. Every cup swallowed was a gamble with their own life, a silent prayer for deliverance from a fate deemed worse than death. You might imagine a courtesan nervously brewing a strong, bitter tea from these very flowers, hoping for a release, yet fearing the unknown consequences. The line between medicine and poison was incredibly thin, and often the exact dosage and preparation methods were imprecise, leading to dangerous outcomes. You sense the intense secrecy surrounding these remedies, passed down in hushed tones. Each recipe a potential key to release or a fatal poison. You'd learn of a variety of herbs and roots believed to possess abortifacient properties, though the scientific understanding of their effects was, of course, utterly lacking. Another common substance, sometimes mentioned in hushed tones, was mugwort. While known for its use in traditional medicine for various ailments, and even as a culinary herb, certain preparations were believed to be emmenagogues, meaning they could stimulate menstruation and potentially induce abortion. You might envision a woman consuming a strong decoction of mugwort, hoping for the desired effect, yet experiencing severe stomach cramps or other painful side effects. The knowledge of these plants was often gleaned from older women, midwives, or even disreputable apothecaries who operated on the fringes of society. Their advice often a blend of genuine traditional knowledge and dangerous guesswork. Historians still argue whether the perceived effectiveness of these herbal remedies was due to their actual abortifacient properties, or simply the result of miscarriages that would have occurred naturally. Beyond these, there were more exotic and often highly toxic substances, sometimes acquired from shadowy sources which promised quick results but delivered immense suffering. Having explored the realm of dubious herbal remedies, you now confront the most visceral and horrifying aspect of this desperation. Physical methods, extreme measures, and other avenues failed or perhaps were deemed too slow. Some courtesans were driven to inflict direct trauma upon themselves or endure it at the hands of others in a brutal, last-ditch effort to end a pregnancy. This could involve using sharp objects, however crude, perhaps a sharpened chopstick, a long needle, or even a hairpin. Imagine the terror, the excruciating pain, and the almost certain outcome of severe infection, hemorrhage, or permanent internal damage. This might involve attempts to rupture the amniotic sac using improvised tools, or the forced consumption of large quantities of unhygienic, irritating substances, hoping to trigger violent contractions and expulsion. The result was often agonizing labor, followed by severe complications, sepsis, and a lingering, painful death. You understand that in a world without antiseptic pain relief or emergency medical care, any form of internal intervention was essentially a death sentence. The desperation that drove these women to such measures paints a truly harrowing picture of their captivity, where the sanctity of their own body was utterly subsumed by the cruel demands of their existence. Your stomach clenches and you feel a profound sadness for the unspeakable suffering endured in those silent, hidden rooms. This was not a medical procedure. It was an act of profound self-mutilation, driven by a desperate singular goal. The lack of sterile conditions, even if one could find someone willing to assist, made these attempts almost uniformly fatal for the woman, let alone the fetus. You might find yourself instinctively recoiling, your body tensing at the sheer brutality of such a thought. The very air around you feels heavy with the silent screams of these unimaginable acts. You'd hear whispers, often fragmented and deeply unsettling, of attempts to puncture or manipulate the uterus. Another chilling, though perhaps less overtly violent, method involved the deliberate and prolonged application of extreme pressure to the abdomen. This wasn't just a casual push. It was sustained forceful compression, sometimes involving heavy objects placed on the stomach, or even the repeated jumping on the abdomen by another person. The grim logic was to crush or dislodge the fetus. You can almost feel the breathless agony, the internal bruising, the terror of a woman enduring such an assault on her own body, or submitting to it from another. While some sources describe this as a technique performed by amateur midwives or desperate acquaintances, the outcome was almost universally catastrophic. Internal ruptures, massive bleeding, and often death for both mother and child. Historians still argue whether the extreme violence of these methods was a reflection of sheer despair or a chilling testament to the ruthlessness of the brothel system. And then there were stories of attempts to induce premature labor through a combination of physical shock and crude instruments. Having witnessed the horrific physical methods, you now approach the darkest, most tragic secret of the pleasure quarters: infanticide. Tragic resort. When all other desperate measures failed, or were simply too late, and a pregnancy progressed to term, the birth of a child presented an impossible dilemma. memory would linger, a constant painful reminder of her captivity and the brutal sacrifices demanded by her existence. The darkness of this reality permeates the very air, leaving you with a profound sense of the unspeakable suffering hidden beneath the dazzling facade of the pleasure quarters. You learn that a child born into the Yoshiwara had no legal status, no family name, and no place in respectable society. Its existence threatened the courtesan's career, revealed the clandestine nature of her life, and incurred significant financial burdens for the brothel. Imagine the immediate, overwhelming panic that would grip a courtesan giving birth in secret. Knowing that discovery meant not just her ruin, but the inevitable demise of her child, the atmosphere would be thick with tension, urgency, and a chilling sense of necessity. The brothel owner, driven by cold economics, would often be the one to orchestrate these tragic acts, ensuring the problem was swiftly and silently dealt with. The methods, though rarely explicitly documented due to their illegal and morally reprehensible nature, were often brutal and swift. You might hear hushed whispers of suffocation or abandonment in remote areas. The prevailing belief was that ending the child's life was a mercy compared to the life of shame. Poverty or neglect it would otherwise endure. This chilling logic, however twisted, was a product of the utterly dehumanizing conditions of the floating world. You understand that this wasn't a choice made out of malice, but out of absolute suffocating desperation and societal pressure that offered no other viable path. Historians still argue whether the prevalence of infanticide in the pleasure quarters was significantly higher than in general society, or simply more hidden. The emotional toll on the courtesan, however, was immeasurable. Having confronted the grim reality of infanticide, you now turn to a glimmer of hope, albeit a rare and often tenuous one. Adoption. Rare escape hatch. For a courtesan's child, being adopted out was one of the few avenues that offered a chance at survival and a life outside. The suffocating confines of the pleasure quarters, the mother, the courtesan, needed to return to her duties as quickly as possible, and a baby was an immense liability. The most common scenario for a child's survival was adoption, though the circumstances were varied and often heartbreaking. The child would grow up without knowing its true parentage, often told a lie about its origins. The birth mother, the courtesan, would never be allowed to acknowledge her child, to visit, or to have any contact. For her, it was a profound and permanent separation, a living ghost she could never embrace. You might imagine the courtesan years later, catching a fleeting glimpse of a child that reminds her of her own, a silent pang of recognition and loss. This kind of adoption, while offering life, demanded an ultimate sacrifice of connection, reinforcing the brutal realities of a world where human bonds were secondary to economic imperatives and social appearances. It paints a vivid picture of a mother's wrenching decision, made under duress, for the perceived welfare of her child. Sometimes a child might be adopted by a lower ranking attendant within the brothel, a woman who perhaps had no children of her own, or who was willing to raise the infant in exchange for a small sum or a reduction in her own debt. You might see a wary-eyed laundress or a kitchen helper quietly take on the role of a surrogate mother, offering a semblance of care to the abandoned infant. You grasp that this was not a compassionate social service, but a pragmatic solution, often driven by the desire to erase a problematic birth. This could be a distant relative of the brothel owner, or perhaps a childless couple looking for an heir. The key, always, was discretion. The child's origins had to be completely obscured, its connection to the courtesan mother severed entirely. The aim was to disappear the child into regular society, often with a fabricated backstory, ensuring no scandal would tarnish the brothel's reputation or the courtesan's allure. You can almost feel the quiet relief, tinged with profound grief, that a courtesan might experience upon knowing her child, though lost to her, had a chance at a normal life. Historians still argue whether these adoptions, however few, provided any genuine emotional solace to the birth mothers. You'd learn that if a child, often immediately after birth, somehow survived or was allowed to live, its presence within the brothel was unsustainable, more rarely and often dependent on the status of the courtesan and the resources of the brothel owner. A child might be placed with a family outside the pleasure district. However, it's crucial to understand that even this escape hatch came with its own set of cruelties. With the tragic options for children laid bare, You now turn your gaze to the orchestrators of this grim calculus. Brothel owners, calculating control. These individuals, known as Zaimoto or Oyaban, were not merely landlords. They were shrewd, ruthless business people who managed every aspect of their human assets, and nowhere was their calculating pragmatism more evident than in their approach to a courtesan's pregnancy. You feel the cold, unfeeling logic that prioritized profit above all else. They would orchestrate infanticide or, in rare cases, arrange for the child's adoption into another family, often in exchange for a fee. The key was to make the child disappear, leaving no trace, ensuring the courtesan could quickly return to work and maintain the illusion of perpetual availability. You might observe the brothel owner's calm, almost detached demeanor, as if dealing with a minor business setback rather than a human tragedy. This cool, calculating control over every aspect of a courtesan's life, especially her reproductive autonomy, underscores the fundamentally exploitative nature of the pleasure quarters, where human lives were merely commodities to be managed for maximum gain. You quickly understand that, for a brothel owner, pregnant courtesan was an immediate and significant financial liability. Every day she was unable to work represented lost income. Every penny spent on her care during pregnancy, childbirth, or recovery was an unrecouped expense. Her body, once a source of revenue, became a drain on resources. Imagine a ledger where every line item is a direct cost or potential profit. Pregnancy would appear as a glaring red entry, a disruption to the carefully balanced economy of the establishment. Their primary concern was not the woman's health or the child's welfare, but the swift restoration of profitability. Their approach was, therefore, incredibly pragmatic and devoid of sentimentality. Upon discovering a pregnancy, the owner's first instinct would be to ensure its immediate termination. You'd realize they would often facilitate access to the dangerous traditional or herbal methods, or even, in the darkest scenarios, oversee the more extreme physical interventions. This wasn't out of malice. From a purely economic standpoint, the quicker the problem was resolved, the less financial damage incurred. They would pressure the courtesan, remind her of her debt, and emphasize the impossibility of raising a child in their establishment. You might even hear the rustle of paper as contracts are invoked, underscoring the woman's lack of rights. Historians still argue whether the Zaimoto genuinely believed they were offering a grim solution or simply enforcing their absolute commercial dominion. If, against all odds, a pregnancy reached term, the brothel owner's control extended to the fate of the newborn. Having observed the cold pragmatism of the brothel owners, your focus now shifts to the other half of the equation: client reactions, varied responses. While courtesans bore the physical and emotional brunt of pregnancy, the men involved, the clients, acted to the possibility of fatherhood in a spectrum of ways, from complete denial to fleeting and often ultimately unfulfilled concern. You realize that their privileged position allowed them a detached perspective, largely free from the consequences that bound the women. Some clients, particularly those who formed a more regular or seemingly affectionate bond with a courtesan, might express fleeting concern. Their anonymity, their social standing, and the very structure of the pleasure quarters protected them from any parental claims. The brothel owners certainly wouldn't risk alienating a paying client by pressing such a sensitive issue. Realize that, for the courtesan, bearing a child often meant facing the consequences entirely alone. A stark reminder of her disposable status in their eyes. The men would return to their respectable lives, their families, and their societal roles, largely unaffected, while the woman was left to grapple with the profound and often tragic fallout. The fleeting concern of a client, you understand, was a luxury that offered no true solace or solution in this brutal world. Perhaps a moment of genuine worry for her well-being, or a vague inquiry about her health. This concern, however, almost invariably stopped short of accepting any actual responsibility for the potential child. They might offer a small sum of money, a kind word, or a promise to look into it. But these gestures seldom translated into concrete action or sustained support. It was a brief acknowledgement of humanity, quickly overshadowed by the societal pressures and personal convenience that dictated their lives. You'd probably scoff at the hollowness of such fleeting compassion. Historians still argue whether these occasional moments of apparent concern were genuine or simply another facet of the elaborate game of maintaining a courtesan's allure. you'd quickly understand that, for most clients, the idea of a courtesan becoming pregnant with their child was simply not contemplated. Their visits were for pleasure, escape, and fantasy, a temporary reprieve from their own domestic realities. The possibility of a tangible, undeniable link to the floating world, a child, was anathema. Therefore, the most common reaction, were they to suspect their involvement, would be outright denial. You might imagine a wealthy merchant confronted with the news, dismissing it as impossible, a ruse, or simply ignoring it altogether. His life was in a different sphere, and any entanglement with the pleasure quarters was meant to be fleeting and inconsequential. The very notion of responsibility simply didn't compute within this transactional relationship. However, you might occasionally witness a flicker of a different response, though it was rarely impactful. Ultimately, the power imbalance was so stark that clients faced virtually no repercussions. With the client's detached reactions now firmly in view, your understanding of the courtesan's plight deepens as you consider societal views. Moral condemnation. While the pleasure quarters were a celebrated and integrated part of Edo period society, the women who inhabited them, especially those who dared to become pregnant, faced an overwhelming tide of judgment and ostracization from mainstream culture. You feel the pervasive weight of this moralistic gaze, heavy with hypocrisy and devoid of compassion. You'd quickly grasp the profound paradox. While men of all social strata frequented the Yoshiwara, and the art and fashion emanating from it were widely admired, she existed outside the societal norms of marriage and family, and therefore her reproductive life was deemed irrelevant or, worse, offensive. Imagine the shame and isolation, knowing that even if she somehow managed to keep the child, it would forever carry the stigma of its birth, effectively an outcast from the moment it drew breath. The prevailing mindset was clear. A courtesan's body was for temporary pleasure, not for creating life. Any challenge to this strict delineation was met with a harsh, unyielding moral judgment, reinforcing the idea that these women existed solely for consumption, not for the fundamental human experience of motherhood. The very air seems to hum with the silent, pervasive judgment of a society that consumed their beauty but rejected their humanity. The women themselves were simultaneously revered as objects of desire and scorned as social outcasts. A child born of a courtesan was often considered a child of the floating world, tainted by its origins, without legitimate lineage, or a place within the rigid social hierarchy of Edo Japan. You might hear the murmurs of gossip, the pointed fingers, the quiet judgments passed by respectable women who lived lives of domesticity. There was no compassion for the circumstances that led a woman into the pleasure quarters, nor for the impossible choices she faced. Instead, the blame fell squarely on her shoulders, reinforcing her perceived moral degradation. Historians still argue whether the extreme societal condemnation served as a control mechanism, preventing challenges to the established social order. They occupied a liminal space, both essential to the entertainment landscape and utterly marginalized. This societal double standard meant that while their services were eagerly consumed, their personal lives, particularly any deviation from their commercial role, were met with severe disapproval. The mere idea of a courtesan becoming a mother was seen as a transgression, a grotesque blurring of lines between the sacred realm of family and the profane world of commercial pleasure. For a courtesan, pregnancy was not just a biological event. It was a profound moral failing in the eyes of society. This pervasive condemnation meant there was no social safety net, no sympathetic ear, and certainly no legal protection for a courtesan facing pregnancy. Having explored the moral condemnation from society, you now consider the limitations of the era's understanding. Medical knowledge. Nascent understanding. In 17th to 19th century Japan, particularly concerning women's health and reproduction, the scientific and medical understanding was rudimentary at best, and often steeped in traditional beliefs and practices. And the understanding of human anatomy and physiology, especially the female reproductive system, was imperfect. While traditional Japanese medicine, Kampo, had its own sophisticated diagnostic and therapeutic approaches rooted in Chinese medicine, it often lacked the surgical or pharmacological interventions necessary for safe abortion or managing complicated pregnancies. They couldn't simply walk into a doctor's office and openly discuss their predicament. Instead, they relied on whispered advice, dangerous experiments, and the grim hope that their bodies would somehow self-correct. You'd sense the profound ignorance surrounding their own biological processes, making them utterly dependent on often fatal guesswork. This nascent medical understanding, or rather the severe lack thereof, significantly contributed to the tragic outcomes for courtesans facing unwanted pregnancies, leaving them alone with desperation and dangerous, unproven methods. It's a stark reminder of how far medical science has progressed, and the sheer vulnerability of people in an era without it. Procedures that are routine today, like ultrasounds or even reliable pregnancy tests, were, of course, millennia away. Imagine relying solely on anecdotal evidence or vague physical symptoms to confirm a pregnancy, often when it was already too late for early, safer interventions. This lack of advanced knowledge further isolated courtesans facing pregnancy, leaving them vulnerable to dangerous remedies and misinformed advice. You'd quickly realize that formal medical training, as we understand it today, was not widespread. Abortion, when it was practiced, was generally shrouded in secrecy and performed by individuals with little formal medical training, often older women, folk healers, or midwives who operated outside of established medical institutions. Their methods, as you've seen, were often dangerous and crude, relying on empirical observation rather than scientific understanding. You might hear stories of concoctions designed to bring down the menses, or attempts to cleanse the womb, without any real comprehension of how the uterus functioned or the delicate nature of a developing fetus. The risks of infection, hemorrhage, and uterine perforation were incredibly high, leading to widespread fatalities. Historians still argue whether the Campo texts offered any genuinely safe, abortifacient knowledge, or were largely speculative. Furthermore, the general societal discomfort with discussing female reproductive health openly meant that even what little medical knowledge existed was not easily accessible or discussed, particularly for women in marginalized positions like courtesans. Having understood the limitations of medical knowledge, you now confront the immense emotional weight of these silent struggles, personal stories, silent suffering. Beyond the historical facts and societal norms, you glimpse the individual tragedies. The myriad of unspoken pains carried by countless courtesans who faced the horror of an unwanted pregnancy. One morning, she feels a subtle shift in her body, a familiar nausea that isn't from the previous night's sake. A cold dread washes over her. The elaborate kimonos suddenly feel suffocating, the incessant shamisen music an irritating drone. She might lie awake at night, listening to the muffled sounds of the brothel. Tears silently tracking paths through her white makeup, mourning a child she can never acknowledge, a life she can never live. The physical toll of the pregnancy, combined with the extreme mental stress, wears her down. You feel the profound isolation, the knowledge that there is no one she can truly confide in, no safe harbor in this storm. Every moment is a struggle to maintain the illusion of health and availability, while her body, against her will, prepares for a future she cannot allow. These countless individual sagas of silent suffering, played out behind closed doors, form a poignant and chilling testament to the brutal cost of life in the pleasure quarters, a constant, unspoken tragedy woven into the fabric of daily existence. She knows the rules, the unwritten laws of the floating world. A pregnancy means ruin. Her debt, already immense, would become impossible. Her life, already a performance, would be irrevocably shattered. You can almost feel her heart pounding in her chest, the rising panic as she tries to conceal her changing body from the hawk-like gaze of the brothel mistress. These are the narratives that rarely made it into official records, buried beneath layers of secrecy and shame. You imagine a young courtesan, perhaps named Hannah, who, despite her forced circumstances, still harbored a quiet dream of a different life. Her days become a torturous dance of concealment. She ties her obi tighter, hoping to mask the slight swelling. She feigns illness to avoid certain patrons, feigning exhaustion to explain her growing weariness. Every glance from an attendant, every casual remark, feels like an accusation. She whispers to a trusted older courtesan, a woman whose own eyes hold a similar, distant sorrow, seeking desperate advice. The older woman, with a grim nod, shares hushed folklore remedies, dangerous herbal concoctions, and the terrifying whispers of physical interventions. You sense Hannah's agonizing choice: risk her life with these crude methods, or face the unthinkable if the child comes to term. Historians still argue whether the camaraderie among courtesans, however limited, offered any genuine emotional refuge. As weeks turn into months, Hannah's despair deepens. After contemplating the hidden personal suffering, you now turn to a unique window into these veiled realities. Shunga art, veiled realities. These erotic woodblock prints and paintings, though explicit in nature, sometimes offered subtle, often overlooked glimpses into the everyday lives of courtesans, including, on rare occasions, hints of the very taboos you've been exploring, like pregnancy and its grim aftermath. You might feel a slight sense of discomfort, then intrigue as you examine these works, searching for hidden meanings. For instance, a print might show a woman applying a medicinal plaster to her abdomen, or a somber conversation between two courtesans that suggests a shared unspoken burden. The very absence of children in these vibrant, teeming pleasure houses, when juxtaposed with the natural biological realities, becomes a powerful, unspoken commentary. You begin to see Shunga not just as erotic art, but as complex historical documents that, despite their primary purpose, inadvertently captured fragments of a hidden truth. They were a fascinating paradox, simultaneously celebrating sensuality in their quiet corners, echoing the underlying pain and silent struggles of the women who fueled this world. You'd quickly discover that Shunga, meaning spring pictures, were immensely popular in Edo, Japan, depicting various forms of sexual activity. While often graphic, they weren't purely pornographic in the modern sense. While overt depictions of pregnancy in Shunga were extremely rare, as they would contradict the fantasy the art was meant to convey. Some scholars suggest that certain works, particularly those depicting scenes within the brothels, might subtly allude to the anxieties surrounding it. You might notice a courtesan's unusually loose obi, or a slightly fuller figure that deviates from the slender ideal, or even a fleeting expression of melancholy amidst a scene of revelry. These aren't explicit confessions, but rather nuanced visual cues, perhaps understood by those intimately familiar with the courtesan's world. Historians still argue whether such subtle deviations were intentional allusions to pregnancy or simply artistic variations. Many were artistic masterpieces, highly detailed and beautifully rendered, reflecting the fashion, customs, and social interactions of the time. They served as a form of sexual education, a source of amusement, and sometimes a critique or commentary on society. You might observe the exquisite detail in a courtesan's kimono or the elaborate patterns of her hair, even amidst the poses. However, amidst the celebratory depictions of pleasure, a keen eye could occasionally detect subtle hints of the harsher realities. Furthermore, some shunga might depict scenes of aftermath or private moments within the pleasure quarters that, while not directly showing pregnancy, hint at its grim solutions. Beyond the visual hints of shunga, you now turn to another source that offered glimpses into the courtesans' hidden lives. Literary accounts, fictionalized pain. While historical records often remain silent on the intimate struggles of women in the pleasure quarters the novels plays, while his works, such as The Life of an Amorous Woman, often focused on their beauty, wit, and romantic entanglements, they occasionally brushed against the darker realities. You might read passages describing a courtesan's melancholy, her quiet despair, or her desperate efforts to escape her debt. A courtesan might be depicted pining for a child she lost, or yearning for a family she could never have. These fleeting moments of profound sadness, woven into narratives of glamour and romance, served as a poignant reminder that behind the beautiful facade were women experiencing the full spectrum of human emotions, including the deepest grief. You might feel a pang of recognition, realizing that even in highly stylized fiction, the echoes of real, profound pain could not be entirely suppressed. These literary works, though fictional, provided a crucial, if veiled, emotional landscape that hinted at the hidden costs of life in the floating world. A testament to the enduring power of storytelling to illuminate even the darkest corners of human experience. While direct mentions of pregnancy and its brutal solutions were still largely taboo, even in fiction, the pervasive sense of entrapment and suffering often alluded to the myriad, unstated heartbreaks these women endured. It was a kind of literary subtext, where the discerning reader could infer the deeper anguish. And poems of the Edo period sometimes dared to explore the emotional complexities and profound sorrows of their existence. Albeit through the lens of fiction, and often with a degree of romanticization, you'd quickly find that authors like Ihara Saikaku, a prominent figure of the ukiyo-zoshi genre, wrote extensively about the lives of courtesans. Consider the classic story of Komurasaki, from the play Sukuroku Yukari no Ido Zakura. While the narrative centers on love and heroism, the underlying desperation of her situation as a courtesan, her ties to the brothel, and the impossibility of a conventional life are palpable. You sense the immense pressure she operates under, where romantic love is often just another facet of her performance or a desperate hope for rescue. These narratives, even when ending tragically, were often designed to elicit empathy from the audience, allowing them to connect with the courtesan's humanity beyond her role as an object of pleasure. Historians still argue whether these fictionalized accounts accurately reflected the emotional lives of courtesans or merely served as convenient dramatic devices. Furthermore, some literary works subtly explored the theme of lost children or impossible family ties, themes that would resonate deeply with the unstated reality of courtesans' pregnancies. Having delved into the fictionalized pains of literary accounts, you now observe moments of defiance, however small or futile. Resistance forms quiet defiance. In a world designed to strip courtesans of their agency, any act of self-assertion, from subtle gestures to bolder statements, constituted a form of resistance against the suffocating control of the brothel system. You might feel a flicker of admiration for these women, even amidst their constrained lives. You'd quickly realize that outright rebellion was almost impossible, the consequences too severe. Instead, resistance often manifested in nuanced, almost imperceptible ways. Despite the pressure to feign affection, some courtesans maintained an inner sanctuary, refusing to allow their true selves to be commodified. Perhaps a slight delay in fulfilling a request, a feigned illness to avoid an undesirable task, or even sharing whispers and grievances among themselves, fostering a quiet sense of solidarity. These weren't grand rebellions, but small daily assertions of frustration against their captors. You might catch a fleeting conspiratorial glance between two courtesans, a shared understanding of their mutual predicament. Even within the confines of the gilded cage, the human spirit, you realize, finds ways to push back, however gently. These quiet acts of defiance were not about escaping the system, but about surviving it with a shred of self intact. A testament to the enduring human need for autonomy, even in the face of profound oppression. You might observe a courtesan's eyes, even as she smiles and laughs, holding a distant resporting, knowing gaze that belies her outward performance. This emotional resilience, this refusal to break under the relentless pressure, is a powerful, if internal, act of resistance. It was a way of saying, you may own my body and my time, but you do not own my spirit. Historians still argue whether this emotional detachment was a coping mechanism or a conscious act of defiance. One common form was the deliberate manipulation of their clientele. A high-ranking courtesan, for instance, had the privilege of choosing her customers. While seemingly a minor detail, this power allowed her to reject men she found distasteful, rude, or overly demanding. I might witness a subtle shake of the head from an Orion's attendant, indicating that she was unavailable to a particular patron, a quiet assertion of dignity in a profession that denied it. This wasn't about avoiding work, but about reclaiming a tiny sliver of control over her interactions, forcing clients to respect her boundaries. Another form of quiet defiance lay in the preservation of personal dignity and emotional detachment. Sometimes resistance could manifest in very subtle acts of sabotage or passive aggression against the brothel owners. Following the quiet acts of defiance, you now turn to the most drastic and perilous forms of resistance: escape attempts, perilous gambles. For some courtesans, the suffocating reality of their debt-bound lives became unbearable, driving them to desperate, often ill-fated bids for freedom. You sense the immense courage and terror that would fuel such a risky undertaking.
Homie?
Knowing the severe consequences of failure, quickly learn that escaping from the pleasure quarters was incredibly difficult and fraught with danger. These romantic elopements, known as shinjur, sometimes ended in tragedy, with the lovers committing suicide rather than facing capture and separation. Other, less dramatic attempts involve simply vanishing into the vast anonymity of Edo's commoner districts, trying to start a new life under a false identity. You understand that such a life would be one of perpetual fear. Always looking over one's shoulder, knowing that discovery meant not just a return to servitude, but likely a worse fate. These perilous gambles, whether driven by love or desperation, underscore the utter lack of viable options for women trapped in the pleasure quarters, painting a stark picture of freedom's immense, often fatal cost. The districts, like Yoshiwara and Edo, were often walled or had controlled entry points, akin to a contained city within a city. Guards were posted, and anyone attempting to flee would be swiftly apprehended. Imagine trying to slip past vigilant sentries, especially in the elaborate attire that marked you as a courtesan. The brothel owners also had extensive networks of informers and bounty hunters who would pursue runaways relentlessly. They had a vested financial interest in retrieving their property. You might feel your heart pound just imagining the frantic dash through shadowed alleys, the constant fear of being recognized. The primary obstacle, however, wasn't just physical security. It was the pervasive debt. Even if a courtesan managed to physically escape, she remained legally bound by her contract. If caught, she would be returned to the brothel, often subjected to severe punishment to deter future attempts. And her debt would likely increase, making freedom even more unattainable. You might hear hushed stories of courtesans being publicly shamed, physically abused, or forced into even lower-ranking positions as a consequence of their failed escape. This grim reality served as a powerful deterrent, often breaking the spirit of those who dared to dream of a life outside. Historians still argue whether the massage was a genuine path to freedom or primarily a tool for control, highlighting the rarity of independent escape. Despite these overwhelming odds, some courtesans did attempt to escape, often fueled by desperate love for a client who promised rescue, or a sheer unyielding desire for autonomy. Having contemplated the bleak retirement fates, you now consider the enduring, yet often misunderstood, legacy's shadow, enduring impact. Despite their marginalized status and tragic individual lives, Japanese courtesans left an indelible mark on their society, influencing art, fashion, language, and culture in ways that continue to resonate, even if their human cost often remains overlooked. The Oiran and Taiyu were the ultimate trendsetters of their era. Their elaborate kimonos, with their bold patterns and innovative draping, influenced mainstream fashion. Their intricate hairstyles, once seen as symbols of their profession, filtered into popular styles. The stories, whispered or fictionalized, of their resilience, their artistry, their tragic circumstances have permeated Japanese consciousness, becoming part of the collective memory. They serve as a poignant reminder of a complex historical period, where human desires and societal strictures intertwined in brutal ways. Their lives, though often short and painful, helped to define an entire era, leaving behind not just a shadow of sorrow, but also a vibrant, undeniable cultural footprint. You understand that while the system that created them was exploitative, the women themselves, through their endurance and their contributions, transcended their circumstances to leave an undeniable mark on history. You might still see echoes of these aesthetic choices in contemporary Japanese fashion or traditional performance arts today. The very language and etiquette of polite society were often shaped by the refined conversations and witty repartee perfected in the tea houses and banquet rooms of Yoshiwara. It's a fascinating paradox. The very women who were socially condemned were also the arbiters of taste and sophistication. You sense a complex interplay of beauty and sorrow, artistry and exploitation that continues to shape modern perceptions. You'd quickly realize that the pleasure quarters were not merely places of physical commerce. They were vibrant cultural hubs, laboratories of style and trends. Furthermore, their influence extended deeply into the world of Japanese art, particularly ukiyo-e woodblock prints. These pictures of the floating world often depicted beautiful courtesans, making their faces and elaborate figures iconic. Artists like Utamaro, Hakusai, and Hirosiage immortalized them, not just as objects of beauty, but sometimes with a subtle hint of their melancholy or inner strength. These prints disseminated widely, shaped the collective imagination of the era, and continued to define much of what the world knows about Edo period Japan. You might look at a famous print now and see not just a beautiful woman, but the enduring cultural ghost of her impact. Historians still argue whether the widespread artistic representation of courtesans contributed to their commodification or, conversely, elevated their status as cultural figures. Beyond the visible impact, there's also the enduring human legacy. From the enduring shadows of their legacy, we now draw connections to our contemporary world, examining modern parallels. Echoes in time. While the specific context of Edo period Japanese courtesans may seem distant, the underlying themes of exploitation, bodily autonomy, societal judgment, and the desperate measures women take under duress resonate surprisingly powerfully with issues we still grapple with today. The courtesan's complete lack of control over her own body, particularly concerning pregnancy, reflects a historical continuum of women being denied fundamental choices about their reproductive health. While no longer involving lead makeup and wooden neck rests, modern society still places immense pressure on women to conform to often unattainable aesthetic ideals. The constant scrutiny, the emphasis on youth, and the commercialization of female bodies in media and advertising echo the courtesan's role as an object to be consumed. You might think of the multi-billion-dollar beauty industry, cosmetic surgery trends, or the relentless pursuit of social media perfection. The underlying message, that a woman's value is tied to her appearance, remains disturbingly persistent. These modern parallels, you realize, demonstrate that while the setting and costumes change, the fundamental struggles for dignity, freedom, self-determination remain timeless challenges, bridging centuries and cultures. The dangerous clandestine abortions, the societal condemnation, and the absolute lack of safe alternatives for unwanted. Pregnancies are stark reminders of what happens when women are denied access to safe and legal reproductive health care. You might find yourself reflecting on current debates surrounding abortion access in different parts of the world, seeing how the same anxieties and moral judgments, albeit in different guises, continue to shape women's lives. Historians still argue whether historical instances of female suffering like those of courtesans genuinely inform modern feminist discourse, or risk oversimplifying complex historical nuances. You feel a chill recognizing how history, despite its unique costumes, often rhymes with the present. You should quickly recognize the echoes of human trafficking and forced labor in the courtesan system. The indenture of young girls into brothels, their lives bound by inescapable debt and physical confinement, bears striking resemblances to modern forms of sexual slavery and forced labor rings that exist globally. While the legal frameworks are different, the core mechanism of entrapment through debt, threats, and lack of agency remains disturbingly similar. You might think of contemporary headlines about young women lured into exploitative situations. Their passports confiscated, their movements controlled, their earnings funneled away. The same forces of poverty and desperation, you realize, continue to drive vulnerability. Then there's the ongoing struggle for bodily autonomy and reproductive rights. Finally, consider the pervasive societal pressures related to beauty standards and commodification. Building on the modern parallels, you now delve into the difficult task of interpreting the past, ethical dilemmas, historical judgment. As you look back at the lives of Japanese courtesans, particularly their struggles with pregnancy, you find yourself grappling with complex moral questions. How do we, from our present vantage point, judge a society and a system so different from our own without imposing anachronistic values. You feel the intellectual tension, the urge to condemn, yet also to understand. You'd quickly recognize the inherent contradiction in viewing the pleasure quarters. On one hand, it was a system built on profound exploitation, often involving the sale of young girls, forced labor, and the denial of basic human rights, particularly reproductive autonomy.
The tragic outcomes of unwanted pregnancy, dangerous abortions, infanticide, and coerced adoptions are undeniably horrific by any modern ethical standard.
Your immediate inclination is to condemn the brothel owners, the clients, and the society that sanctions such practices. Imagine the visceral repulsion you feel when considering the brutal pragmatism that dictated these women's lives. However, you're also challenged to avoid a simplistic condemnation. This was a different era, with different social norms, economic realities, and moral frameworks. Poverty was widespread, and for many families, selling a daughter into the pleasure quarters was not an act of malice, but a desperate attempt to ensure the survival of other family members or to escape starvation. For some women, albeit a tiny minority, becoming a high-ranking courtesan could offer a degree of cultural influence, education, and even economic power that was otherwise unavailable to women in their social class. Historians still argue whether the concept of choice, as we understand it today, is even applicable to women in such constrained historical circumstances. The ethical dilemma, then, lies in navigating this complexity. Do we judge Edo society by our current standards of human rights and bodily autonomy, finding it unequivocally barbaric? Or do we strive for a more nuanced understanding, acknowledging the historical context and the societal pressures that shaped individual choices and institutional practices, even when those practices were abhorrent? You might consider the risk of presentism, judging the past solely through the lens of the present, thereby failing to understand the historical forces at play. It's not about excusing the injustices, but about grasping the full spectrum of motivations and constraints. This careful navigation of ethical judgment forces you to confront the uncomfortable truth that human history is rarely a simple narrative of good versus evil, but a messy tapestry woven with threads of desperation, survival, and sometimes profound cruelty, all within the shifting sands of cultural values. Having wrestled with the ethical complexities of historical judgment, you now pivot to acknowledge the fortitude of those who endured. Unimaginable circumstances, unsung heroes, forgotten resilience. The Japanese courtesans, particularly those who navigated the treacherous waters of unwanted pregnancy, were not merely victims. They were individuals who displayed remarkable strength, cunning, and an incredible will to survive, often in the face of absolute powerlessness.
Ah, yes.
You feel a profound respect for their quiet, enduring spirit. And constant surveillance required sharp wit, keen observation, and an almost superhuman ability to manage emotions. They had to be enchanting, alluring, and seemingly carefree, all while carrying the heavy weight of their circumstances. You'd observe their ability to deflect intrusive questions with a charming smile, to subtly influence a conversation, or to maintain an air of grace even when exhausted. This emotional labor, often invisible, was a testament to their strength. Historians still argue whether the courtesan's resilience stemmed from individual strength or from a collective, albeit often unspoken. Understanding within their community, you'd realize that their resilience manifested in myriad ways. It was in the painstaking mastery of their arts, the endless hours of practice, and the unwavering dedication required to perfect their craft. Despite being trapped, they often excelled, becoming highly skilled musicians, dancers, poets, and conversationalists. This pursuit of excellence, even under duress, was a form of dignity, a refusal to be utterly defined by their exploitation. You might imagine a courtesan meticulously practicing a new shamisen piece, finding solace and a sense of accomplishment in her artistic prowess, even as her heart ached with unseen burdens. Their social intelligence and emotional fortitude were also immense. To navigate the complex web of client expectations, brothel politics. Perhaps the most poignant display of their resilience was in their efforts to survive pregnancy. Despite the overwhelming odds, whether resorting to dangerous traditional methods, seeking clandestine herbal remedies, or enduring the heartbreaking decision of infanticide or adoption, Each choice was born of an extreme will to continue existing, to navigate an impossible situation with the only tools available. It wasn't about heroism in the traditional sense, but about the profound human instinct for self-preservation in the face of brutal oppression. You understand that every surviving courtesan carried a unique story of silent battles, fought, and personal demons overcome. These were not just figures in history books. They were women of immense, often hidden strength, whose quiet struggles and enduring spirit deserved to be remembered, not as mere objects of pity, but as unsung heroes of survival. Having acknowledged the unsung resilience of these women, you now reflect on the broader implications of their stories, discerning historical lessons, timeless warnings. The intricate, often brutal, tapestry of the Japanese courtesans' lives offers profound insights into enduring human struggles, serving as timeless cautionary tales about the dangers of unchecked power, the impact of societal hypocrisy, and the enduring importance of agency. The pleasure quarters, despite their cultural vibrancy, were fundamentally built upon economic and social subjugation. The debt system, the lack of legal recourse, the complete control exerted by brothel owners created a perfect environment for exploitation. The horrific measures taken to terminate pregnancies, the lack of safe alternatives, and the complete denial of choice reveal the catastrophic consequences when women are stripped of control over their own bodies. Their experiences serve as a grim testament to the fact that when women are denied agency over their reproductive lives, they are often forced into dangerous, life-threatening situations. You understand that the struggle for these fundamental rights is not a new phenomenon, but a battle that echoes through centuries, highlighting the enduring necessity of advocating for self-determination and dignity for all individuals. These historical lessons, you realize, are not just about a bygone era. They are timeless warnings, echoing into the present, urging constant vigilance against the forces that seek to diminish human freedom and agency. This serves as a timeless reminder that any system that denies individuals their basic rights and autonomy, particularly based on gender, class, or circumstance, will inevitably lead to profound suffering. You might think of modern-day examples of sweatshops, predatory lending, or even subtle forms of economic coercion, realizing how easily freedom can be eroded when power is concentrated and unchecked. You'd quickly recognize the stark warning against systems of exploitation. Another crucial lesson lies in the devastating impact of societal hypocrisy and double standards. Edo society both celebrated and condemned the courtesans, consuming their artistry and services while simultaneously ostracizing them and denying them basic human dignity, especially concerning their reproductive lives. This moral inconsistency led directly to the dangerous, secretive practices surrounding pregnancy and the tragic fates of children born into the system. It's a powerful warning about the dangers of a society. It creates a demand for a service, but then demonizes those who provide it, forcing them into the shadows where abuses flourish. You might reflect on contemporary issues where similar societal contradictions continue to harm marginalized groups. Historians still argue whether the Yukio served as a necessary societal pressure release or simply enabled the exploitation of vulnerable women. Finally, the courtesan stories underscore the critical importance of bodily autonomy and reproductive rights. As the intricate narratives of the courtesans' lives begin to recede, you are left with a final reflection. Lingering thoughts. It's the vibrant, yet tragic world of Edo Japan's pleasure quarters, and the harrowing reality of pregnancy within it slowly fades from sharp focus, leaving behind a profound sense of the human condition in all its complexity. The rustle of silks, the delicate scent of incense, the haunting melodies of the shamisen, these sensory details that initially drew you in, now carry a bittersweet echo, a reminder that superficial allure often conceals profound human costs. The image of a courtesan, her face a mask of white lead, her smile practiced, remains with you. You wonder about the thoughts behind those eyes, the unspoken dreams, and the unshed tears. The vivid imagery of Edo's pleasure quarters slowly dissolves, replaced by the comforting familiarity of your surroundings. Let the intricacies of their world, the harsh beauty and the quiet sorrows, drift away. Your mind can now release the historical weight, allowing peace to settle in. There's no need to hold on to the specific details now. It's just the lingering sense of a journey completed, a story heard, Feel the softness of your pillow, the gentle rhythm of your own breath. Let the quiet darkness embrace you, and allow your thoughts to become as light as the faintest whisper. Relax into the stillness, into the calm. Just breathe, and let it all fade into a peaceful quiet. It's a powerful image of quiet endurance, of a life lived for others, yet secretly yearning for something more. Your mind drifts, allowing the weight of these stories to settle, to resonate in the quiet hum of the room. You ponder the sheer resilience required to navigate such an existence, to perform, to charm, to endure. Day after day, year after year, with so little agency. The desperate choices made regarding pregnancy, the unimaginable sacrifices, linger in your mind. Not as sensational details, but as raw, human responses to impossible circumstances. Historians still argue about the precise motivations and psychological states of these women, leaving much to our contemplative imagination. Yet, the universal threads of maternal instinct, survival, and a yearning for dignity remain strikingly clear. Think about the paradox of beauty and suffering. It's how the most exquisite artistry and meticulous presentation often masked the deepest despair. The silence that follows the stories is not empty, but filled with the whispers of countless lives, each a testament to a strength born of necessity. The line between boring history and profoundly moving human drama has blurred. These aren't just dry facts about ancient Japan. They are echoes of lives lived, struggles endured, and choices made under duress. As the last remnants of the floating world dim, you are left with the quiet understanding that history, even the parts that seem most mundane, is always, at its core, a story of people. People striving, people suffering, people enduring. Their lives, however, distant in time and culture, reflect a shared humanity, reminding you of the strength of the human spirit, even when pushed to its absolute limits. The faint glow of your screen softens, the gentle hum of the fan, a soothing presence in the quiet, benign night.